Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Constance McBaron. I'm the Communications Manager for Earth Lab and the Climate Impacts Group, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's webinar. We really appreciate you all for joining us. This webinar is called Taking Stock of Available Resources for Understanding and Responding to Climate Risks in Washington and the Northwest. So this webinar is actually the second in a new series from the Climate Impacts Group, which we're celebrating 30 years this year. And this webinar series is called Our Climate Future. We're building on 30 years of the organization's research, data, tools, and impact to inspire new ways to stay connected and envision a just and resilient world where people and nature thrive in a changing climate. During our hour together, you'll hear from our two speakers, Mead Crosby, a senior scientist with the UW Climate Impacts Group and the University Director of the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, and Guillaume Mauger, the Washington State climatologist and a research scientist with the Climate Impacts Group. Before I hand it off to them, I have a few housekeeping items to share with you all. So one, questions. Please use the Q&A box for your questions. And reactions are welcome. They are enabled here today down at the bottom toggle bar. So if you'd like to share a reaction to something that resonates with you, we welcome that. This webinar is being recorded, and we invite you finally to join our interactive poll on Menti by clicking the link that I shared in the chat or using your phone to access the QR code on this. I don't know which side it's on this slide. So with that, it is my pleasure to pass it over to our speakers to get us started. Guillaume and Mead.
Thanks, Constance. I am going to share my screen. Give me one moment. Constance, you have to approve my request to share. Thanks a lot. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mead Crosby, and I'm going to be joined today by my colleague, Guillaume Mauger. Together, we're going to try to provide an overview of the evolving status of federal climate resources. We're going to walk through the range of non-federal climate resources for informing Northwest decision makers as they prepare for and respond to climate risks. And then we're going to finish up by briefly exploring some gaps in our regional resources and opportunities for expanding to fill them as the federal landscape remains uncertain. So in considering the current status and the evolving status of federal climate resources, we've categorized them into a few different groupings. And I'll just give a couple heads up. One, recognizing we're going to give you some key examples of the kinds of changes that we're seeing. We can't cover all of it and be completely comprehensive because there's just so much going on right now, and there are so many different resources to cover. So just a disclaimer that this won't be completely comprehensive. And then one other heads up is that we're going to be sharing lots of examples and screenshots of websites and resources and tools. And just to get ahead of you, like, you don't need to be feverishly writing down each of these websites. We're going to have a follow-up email after this webinar that'll include a link to the recording of the webinar, and we will send a resource page, a document with a whole bunch of links to everything that we shared today. So we do hope that this webinar will be a resource for you moving forward, and that you'll make use of some of the examples and the resources that mostly Guillaume will be sharing later. Okay, so in thinking about trying to make sense of what's going on with the federal landscape of climate resources, first we can talk about the resources that have been removed from federal government websites in recent months, and there have been several examples of this. It's included things like the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which was removed within hours of inauguration from federal websites. And that's very much been a pattern where climate resources that are focused on equity and environmental justice have been particularly targeted for removal. So in addition to tools like the screening tool, we've also seen the loss of important assessments. Most notable among these is the National Climate Assessment, which had its website removed in early July, along with the website for the US Global Change Research Program, which has essentially been eliminated at this point. So this means that there's no longer a federal front door for the National Climate Assessment. The public can no longer easily find these reports and find, especially past assessments. You can find sprinkled in some places on the federal websites right now a PDF, standalone version of the most recent National Climate Assessment, but there's currently no way to find all 5 of them in one place. And to find all of the resources, the contextual information, supporting resources and outreach and education materials that were on the original site. So all of that is off of federal websites now. And in addition to that, there's also currently no plan for completing the 6th National Climate Assessment, which was underway until it was effectively terminated back in April. So there's no plan to update this information. In addition to tools and assessments, we've also seen several trainings and other capacity building opportunities disappear from federal websites. So one example is EPA's Creating Resilient Water Utilities initiative. So their in-person trainings are apparently no longer available. And we've noticed on NOAA sites that many climate-related trainings have nothing upcoming scheduled on the calendar. So again, we can't be completely comprehensive. This can vary across agencies and programs, but it does appear to be a pattern that some of these climate-related trainings are disappearing from federal websites and availability. In addition to things that have been just eliminated or removed from federal sites, there are examples of resources that have been moved or modified. And so this has made them harder to find, and they're not quite what they were. So one of the most notable examples of this is climate.gov, which was a critical primary landing page for federal climate resources. In June, climate.gov staff were all fired, and the site was moved to the NOAA website. So now it's at noaa.gov/climate. But without staff, it's no longer being updated. So for example, up here on the right, they talk about the ENSO updates. So the ENSO blog that told us about, helped us make sense of El Niños and La Niñas, and we know we're looking at a La Niña coming this year. The ENSO blog was very helpful for contextualizing that and keeping us up to date. That's no longer being updated and available on the site. So interestingly, the US Climate Resilience Toolkit, which was a key part of climate.gov, it is still up as part of the climate.gov site, but it looks pretty different and several things appear to be missing. So here's the site on the left here back in July, and then here's the current version. And most notably, they have removed the incorporating equity and the climate ready workforce, 2 main categories of resources that were available on that site. They're no longer there. And they've made different things prominent with more of a focus on hazards, less of a focus on guidance. So the Climate Resilience Toolkit is still up, and that's a really key federal resource, but it has been moved and changed. And then finally, it is important to recognize that many, many federal climate resources are still up in their original place, still easy to find and use. They don't appear to have been changed in any way. So for example, it looks like it's still the NOAA Sea level rise viewer is still up and available where it's been. And Climate Explorer tool, which is part of the Climate Resilience Toolkit. The Explorer tool is still up and available just as it's always been. Interestingly, the Climate Explorer tool is a federal product, but it actually lives on a non-federal website because it's a partnership with the National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center at University of North Carolina. So hopefully that means that there's little risk of it becoming lost or changed in any way because even though it's a federal product, it's not based on a federal website. So ultimately, the availability of rigorous, accessible climate resources by the federal government is likely to remain in flux. It really is a pretty rapidly changing situation. Um, it's important to note that some resources that were eliminated have since been restored. So, for example, many climate-related web pages and resources from the Department of Agriculture were removed. They were then sued by organic farmers and environmental groups and then were restored earlier this summer. I can't say for certain that they were all restored, but many of them have since been restored. So some resources can be lost and then after litigation come back. I think really the most concerning um, possibility is the potential for provision of misinformation and corrupted climate resources from the administration. So really, the most glaring example so far has been the recent Department of Energy climate report, in which they convened a small group of known climate skeptics who produced a report that downplayed climate risks. They used cherry-picked um, papers and science. They misrepresented science. And that report was very quickly reviewed and debunked by hundreds of scientists and scientific societies. Um, but it is still up on the DOE website. So, so far, changes like these have been pretty widely and quickly reported in the media. So I think the message here is just we're at a time where it pays to do some due diligence when engaging with federal climate resources. It wouldn't hurt to do a quick search to see if there's anything in the news about the resource that you're looking for or that you're using, just to see if anyone's picked up on anything having been changed or anything concerning about it. And again, it is important to recognize that many, many, many resources are still there. They seem to be just fine. And given examples like this, it doesn't hurt to take a quick look to make sure that everything seems to be okay. So with that, we're going to do a quick poll because we know that um, we can see who has signed up for this webinar, and we know that there's a lot of expertise among the audience here and also many users of this information. So we would love to hear from you. What federal climate resources are you most concerned about? And again, if you want to join, you go to menti.com and use that code above, or you can use the code here on the left. And I think has it started? Let me see. Have you all been able to join?
We were able to join that one question, but I
Ah,
didn't get a link to other questions.
no, that's good. We want just this one
Oh,
question.
okay, great.
So I see one
So
response. There you go. Okay.
here's a direct link for folks as well.
Thank you for sharing these. This is actually also really helpful for us to know as providers of climate information and services for the Northwest. It's very helpful for us to see what people are concerned about, to see where we can help fill gaps or make sure we know where people are backing stuff up so we can provide links so that people can find it. So concern about national climate assessments, environmental justice screening tools, USDA climate hubs, grant funding to support tribes and their climate work, Justice 40, NOAA data assessment toolkit, climate resilience toolkit and explorer, more national climate assessment, the casks, thanks, feel that one. Um, more national climate assessment, sea level rise dashboard. Yeah, thank you all. This is really helpful to see what you're most concerned about, again, to um, help us respond. Okay, this will stay, yeah, and the experts who ran it all, definitely thinking about our federal colleagues and their well-being and the loss of their expertise, which is really heartbreaking. Okay, thank you all, and please, this will stay open for a little bit, so please keep adding. I think it'll stay open. Okay, I'm going to move on. All right, so some good news is that several resources have been backed up and are now available on non-federal websites. So there was a pretty intentional, widespread response early in the early days of the administration to make sure that this was as much federal information as possible would be archived because we anticipated, or many people anticipated, that this kind of thing could happen and we could lose or have modified climate information from the federal government. So there are backups. Many of these backups are sort of sprinkled around the web and may not be very easy to find or might be difficult to navigate. So things like the Wayback Machine and Web Archive can be somewhat overwhelming. There's a lot of information on there. So some of the easier ways to find archived federal resources is through organized repositories, like this great guide from Esri. They have a guide to archived federal environmental data, tools, and websites, and it makes it pretty easy to find things you might be looking for. Um, some academic libraries have been doing this as well. So UW libraries, they have been archiving federal data. You don't have to be part of the UW community to use it, so it's open to anybody. So that's another great resource. And then one of the really more inspiring developments has been the recent launch of, for example, climate.us. So this is a new nonprofit website that was developed by those fired staff from climate.gov. So they've basically been starting a nonprofit to resurrect climate.gov off of the federal websites. And so, so far, they have, just within the last few weeks, they resurrected the original website for the National Climate Assessment, which has all 5 assessments. It has all of that contextual information, the outreach and education materials, everything that comes with the National Climate Assessment. And they're not just PDFs, they're like the originally, or at least for NCA 5, it's that sort of original interactive web format. So that's just super exciting. And they have plans to keep bringing back more of that material over time. And they're fundraising. So if you're looking for a good cause, you can help contribute to that. Another similar example is that the NOAA staff member who ran the $1 billion climate disaster website, which helps insurance companies and researchers and decision makers understand the changing economic costs of climate change. He moved to Climate Central. If you're not familiar, Climate Central, that's another great climate org, a nonprofit. And a good news here is that not only are they resurrecting the database, like maintaining the database on Climate Central, but they're actually going to expand upon it. So they're going to have additional analysis and build it out even more than it was on the federal website. So this is another kind of bright spot from all of this destruction. Okay, I got another Menti for you. What, if any of you have, I'd be curious what backup resources you have found most useful. Have you used a backup resource? And if so, which ones have you found helpful? And it's okay if, oh, there we go. So, oh, we already got a climate.us user. That's fantastic. archived national climate assessment, national climate assessment on climate.us. So this, you guys you're on it, you're finding, and it's okay if you haven't found these resources. That's why we're doing this call today. But it sounds like some of you are already using some of these. So the environmental justice screening tool, again, that's been backed up. Glad to see people are using it. Climate literacy principles at climateliteracy.earth. Another person using the backed up environmental justice screening tool. And then I actually don't know what WPSR is, but I will look it up. Lists links to a select group of health resources. That's great. So a workaround for the loss of the environmental screening tool is the CDC social vulnerability maps. Oh, great. Love seeing lots of folks on top of it with environmental justice analysis. So using Washington Department of Health's health disparities map. Oh, someone found an archived national climate assessment through an AP article. That's great. All right, I'm really glad to see that folks are already finding backups out there that they're finding useful. That is really great to hear. Yeah, so keep adding these. This is also really useful information to know where to point people to see what you've already found to be helpful. Okay, I'm going to move on, but please feel free to keep adding to these. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Guillaume Auger to talk about non-federal resources.
Guillaume, you're muted.
You would think I would know that by now. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Thanks, Mead, and thanks everybody for everything you've shared so far. So now you've got an overview from Mead in terms of the federal landscape. I want to talk about in this section of the talk what we have outside of the federal resources, right? And I think the take home here is that we've got a lot of great, really excellent resources to draw from. So next. All right, for the purpose of this discussion, we thought it'd be helpful rather than just tick off a long laundry list. First of all, as Mead mentioned at the beginning, we're not going to try to be comprehensive here, so apologies in advance if your favorite resource isn't included. And please, at the end, there's one more Menti poll. Let us know about it. And then the other thing is we wanted to categorize these again, just to help us sort of see the bigger picture and have it a little bit more organized. So there's lots of ways you could do this. There may be better ways, but the way that we chose to organize it for the purposes of today was into these four categories: assessments, tools, trainings, and technical assistance. Next. Okay, so I want to define each of these. So what do we mean by assessments? The key point here is that we're not just talking about syntheses of the science, but we're also talking about syntheses of the practice of adaptation, right? So not just what are the impacts, but also what are folks doing about it. Next. Tools, we're defining this very broadly, and this turned into a big category. But so we're not just talking about data tools and visualizations here. We're also talking about tools that sort of help you identify actions or strategies, other resources, and a variety of other things. I'll walk through those in a moment. Next. Trainings. I want to first acknowledge that, capacity building, sort of, developing climate adaptation skills is a through line in everything that we do in climate adaptation. It's one of the more important aspects of climate adaptation work, in my opinion. Here, we're not talking about the general term capacity building. We're talking specifically about those trainings that are out there, especially in the context of the trainings that are no longer happening on the federal side that Mead mentioned. And these could be for new folks or for experienced professionals, and you'll see that in the examples. And then finally, technical assistance, right? So direct support for adaptation. I want to talk about that. I definitely don't want to leave that out given its importance in most adaptation work. Okay, thanks. Next. All right, so starting with assessments, like I said, we're not being comprehensive here. I wanted to give a few state examples, but these kinds of assessments, there are lots of examples out there. Some of them are local, some of them at the state level, some regional, and focused on our region. Next. So focusing on the state assessments that are out there for the Northwest, Idaho came out with a climate assessment just 2 years ago, the Idaho Climate and Economics Impacts Assessment, excuse me, just 2 years ago. And then next, the Oregon is actually mandated by state law to create a new assessment every few years. They've just released their seventh climate assessment. Next. And Washington. We put out an assessment in 2013, a statewide assessment. We've done more localized assessments more recently than that. And you can tell here, we're sort of, ours is the oldest of the batch. And we're actually currently working on an update. We'll be releasing the first part of that at the end of 2026, with the other parts coming out later. Okay, next. Okay, so those are sort of broad assessments that reviewed the science across a range of topics, but there are also ones that are much more specific and focused. So next, as an example, this one in particular looked at sea level rise and coastal habitats. So focusing in on both the science and practice. So this is a good example of blending the science and practice in that context. Next. And then other ones really focus on specific categories of strategies. So for instance, this one was focusing on the public health issues surrounding heat exposure and what are the policy pathways to taking action to increase resilience in that respect. Next. All right, so that's assessments. Now tools. Like I said, this is a broad category. So I'm going to have a couple of slides on this, starting with data visualization on this slide. So next, first example here is one that many of you will probably be familiar with, which is the Climate Toolbox. This actually covers, many of the tools actually cover most of the United States, or at least the continental United States. One of the things I really like about what they have on here is that they don't just give information about future climate, they also have information on past climate, as well as current and near-term forecasts. They've broken it down into ones that are focused on climate information, and other ones that look at ag, fire, and water as well. And then for another example, and this one's a little bit different because in the case of the Climate Toolbox, those are all tools that were created internally, same approach. And this is a library, this new example is a library that we've begun developing at the State Climate Office. And these is actually, the vast majority of these point to external tools outside of our organization that weren't developed by us, but ones that we've identified as particularly useful that we want to make it easy for folks to find and access. So those are some data tools. And go to the next slide, thanks. And so another category is decision support tools. And this in and of itself is a broad category because it can include tools that are really geared towards the nuts and bolts of a particular kind of decision context and really get into the nitty-gritty, but also other tools that really, I think, sort of straddle the boundary between guidance and decision support tool, or excuse me, guidance and tool. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples that sort of show a little bit of both of those. First example, next is the one that this is the Climate Action Toolkit developed by the North Olympic Development Council. So that's along the Strait of Juan de Fuca, very localized geography. One of the things that I really like about this one is you can drill down to specific sectors or topic areas, and they start, there's two things I like in particular. They start with a set of key strategies that they've identified as ones that they want to highlight. So it's starting with a few pretty detailed facts, and then they have a list of tools and things like that. The other thing that I like is towards the end, they get into very specific actions that you can take. So things like, regulations or other plans that you can fold resilience actions into. Okay, another example is, and this is the one that I'm thinking of when I say some straddle the line between guidance and tool. This is the leading practices in climate adaptation. It's been out for a few years now, developed by the Water Utility Climate Alliance. One of the things I really like about this one is that it has a lot of case studies in it. So they've organized those based on essentially the adaptation cycle. So these categories of where you are in the cycle of adaptation: engage, understand, plan, implement, sustain. And within those, they have a lot of guidance as well as some specific case studies of what other folks have done in those contexts. Next. And then I wanted to finally highlight a specific one that was developed by the Washington Department of Commerce. It's called the Climate Policy Explorer, really geared towards folks who are integrating climate in their comprehensive planning. It's got, like a lot of these, a search function. You can say you want to do greenhouse gas reductions, or you want to look at resilience actions, focus on a specific topic area. It gives you a list of strategies, and you can click on one, and then it tells you where it would go, a bunch of information, and where it would go in the comprehensive plan, which climate issues it addresses, and what kind of language or actions or strategies you would want to include in the plan. So that's an example one that's a lot more targeted to a specific application. Okay, next. All right, so a third category of tool, we've got 4 categories of tools. Like I said, this is a broad category, is adaptation libraries. So here we're zooming out a little bit. We're looking at databases that include a lot of information in them, but it is fairly focused in that it's really focused on strategies and actions, right? And so the idea is it's kind of encyclopedic. It's including a broad array of strategies and actions that either folks have used or folks have suggested to use in different contexts. Next. So one example that's been around for a few years is the adaptation library developed by Adaptation Partners. So this came out of a bunch of climate adaptation planning efforts nationally with federal land management agencies, so national parks, the Forest Service, and others. Um, it is applicable to other land management, non-federal land management situations, as well as it is to federal. And what they did is they gathered together a lot of the strategies that they'd identified and then put them into a database that you can now search and filter. That's one example. Next. Another example focused on a slightly different topic area, there is some overlap between these two, but is the Tribal Resilience Action Database. And what's different about this one is it was created by tribes for tribes. A similarity with the adaptation library is that it's, again, a searchable database of actions. You can drill down by topic area and look at what folks, in some cases, have already done, in other cases, have proposed. All right, next. Okay, last category of tools. So we're zooming even further out here. These ones are really in the realm of trying to be as comprehensive as possible. And we're calling those clearinghouses. These are going to be trying to gather as much of the resources that are out there as possible into one place that's searchable, right? That's going to include things like reports, toolkits, other tools, guidance, case studies, a variety of things like that. Next. The one that many of you have probably heard of, it was actually developed by our neighbors on Bainbridge Island here, EcoAdapt. It's the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange. This is, like I said, a database that includes all sorts of examples of resources. One of the things that's worth noting about this one is kind of like a Wikipedia article, you can contribute your own resources or ones that you've identified that are missing or that are needed in there. It's moderated by EcoAdapt, and so they'll, look at it and then post it after some back and forth. Next. And then very similar is the Adaptation Clearinghouse developed by Georgetown University. I think my sense is it has a little bit more of a policy focus, but similar idea, really intending to be pretty comprehensive as a resource as a way to find all sorts of different kinds of resources. I wanted to make sure to mention the Georgetown page because they also have another resource that's related, which is a database of local adaptation plans. And there's a mapping interface where you can look at where they're from and filter them in other different ways. Next. Okay, so that's it for tools. Trainings. So again, like I mentioned before, here we're talking about formal trainings of various stripes. And they are geared towards a variety of folks, and that ranges from folks that are pretty experienced in the field and wanting to brush up in some particular area to folks who are new and interested in entering the field. Next. One really stellar example that I want to highlight is the Tribal Climate Camp. This is a 1-week camp that happens about every year. It was developed by the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians here in the Northwest, geared towards tribal members interested in building climate expertise and also leadership in climate within their context. Next. A different example is the Coastal Training Program. This is affiliated with NOAA, but run independently by coastal states. I believe there's a coastal training program in every coastal state. In our state of Washington, it's run by the Washington Department of Ecology. And they, for more than a decade, have included climate adaptation concepts in a number of their courses, focused, of course, on coastal issues, but geared towards professionals that are interested in gaining some experience. Next. And then I wanted to highlight some examples for folks who are new or interested in entering the field. And to do that, I wanted to highlight this page from Washington State that has a list of opportunities of that kind. So there's a variety of things that come on there. I wanted to also make sure you just know about this resource from excuse me, from Washington State. And then you'd have to squint to see it. You probably can't, but the top link, just to highlight one example, is the Washington Climate Corps Network, run a little bit similar to it's not Army Corps, AmeriCorps, excuse me. And so same idea for folks entering the field, gaining some climate experience. It's an interesting new initiative. All right, next. Okay, last topic is technical assistance. And here I'm not going to provide any specific examples. And that's because there are lots of different shapes and forms this takes and lots of different folks who could be engaged in this way, right? And I want to, before talking about those examples, just really emphasize that, we've named a lot of specific resources here. Those are really important, but as many of us know, often the collaborative aspects and the network aspects of climate adaptation are the really key aspects, especially for going that last mile from those more canned resources to the specific context and needs of any particular effort, right? So next, please. So just to sort of tick off some of the folks that are involved and that could be relevant in these contexts. I think many of you have probably personal experience with this, but just to tick them off, we've got lots of really excellent nonprofit organizations that are doing climate adaptation work and can support it. Private consultants are critical for this kind of work. There's academics that do this research and that are often good to engage with. Professional organizations are really important in this context as well. State agencies, both for folks working within a state agency or among each other, as well as the service they provide to communities. And then boundary organizations. And I want to end with that one because it's a bit of a technical term, but here I'm referring to organizations whose mission really is to straddle that boundary between the science and practice of climate change. So we at the Climate Impact Group, for instance, think of ourselves as a boundary organization. The Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, our colleagues in Oregon, also think of themselves as a boundary organization. But other examples that you might be more familiar with are Sea Grant. There's a Sea Grant in Oregon and Washington. The Ag and Forest Extension programs out of the state universities, conservation districts, others like that. So that whole ecosystem is really important. It's another way in which we have a lot of resources in our region. Next, please. Okay, and before moving on, I just wanted to mention that, there are some places already that pull a lot of these features into one place in much the same way or in similar ways to what the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit did. And one that I wanted to highlight next is the user guide to climate change portals that the Aspen Global Change Institute put together. So this is focused on the Mountain West, so kind of the interior Western U.S., the Rockies and surrounding states. But there's quite a bit of overlap with our region. So a lot of what they have here is applicable to us. And what they've done is pulled together a lot of those resources that we were just identifying, right? So they have a section on assessments. They have a comprehensive list of data and tools, but they also have a curated list of data and tools. And then they have some of their own guidance, walking folks through where to go with this information, as well as some links to other guidance and other resources as well. Okay. So this is my last slide. We want to move on to our final poll from you all. And so here, really what we wanted to ask, oh, and thanks, some of you had already jumped in, appreciate that. We've asked about, what do you value and are you concerned about in the federal side? What are some resources that you're interested in locally or that you use? Here we want to talk about the flip side of those questions, which is what's not out there, inclusive of or irrespective of what's been taken down on the federal side that you would like to see, so what's missing? And thanks for the answers already. Sustainable long-term funding it's a good one. Seasonal forecasts are really important. Distillations of the information that's out there. Again, communications, youth-led climate publications. That's a great idea. Thank you. Funding, that's an important one. Long-term forecasts. Okay, interesting. That we got 2 comments on that already. Good. Advocacy for funding adaptation work. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. I'm excited too about the assessment. Thank you. Downscaled climate futures. Okay. Thanks for these ideas. These are great. Sustained learning partnerships. I think that's an excellent idea. I think there's a lot to be said for peer networking and learning. Wind data and projections. That's a definite gap. Moving beyond plans and assessments to implementation. Grants for small cities. That's a great idea. Reliable assessments. Oh, of the effectiveness. Great. That makes sense. Summary of forecasting. That's good. As motivation for implementation. More ways for youth to get involved. I love that. Highlighting the actions that have been taken. That is a great idea. Case studies, databases of case studies. I agree. That's something I'm always wanting more of. Species vulnerabilities, coastal hazard mapping. I like the climate chat gatherings. All right. I don't want to take up too much time, Mead. I know you have a few more slides to share. We've got a few more answers coming in. Tools for prioritizing funding. In this case, focusing on riparian restoration. Great idea. Economic impacts. The sort of cost of no action versus action. Great. Okay, well, thanks for these responses. It looks like you can continue to put them in. I think, Mead, we should move on just in the interest of time.
Great. Thanks, Guillaume. Thanks, everyone, for all these great responses. Okay, so some key message that you might have picked up from Guillaume's presentation is that there are a lot of great resources already available that are not federal, that are here in the Northwest, or that are national and applicable to the Northwest. And there is still room to fill gaps in the resources that are available to us while that the status of federal resources remains uncertain. As that continues to evolve, how can we step up our work in the Northwest to fill those gaps as they emerge on the federal side? And so there are many different things we can do. Just one example might be that there's really no central regional hub for resources like those that have been provided by the federal government. Like we don't have an equivalent of like a climate.gov for the Northwest or any of the individual states in the Northwest, for example. There are some kind of early stage attempts at something like that, like at the Climate Impacts Group. Guillaume has been leading development of the climate adaptation resources for Washington, or Car Wash, which is a place that is sort of pulling together a bunch of different resources for folks in Washington. But so far, there's no real equivalent of the breadth and how well organized and supported some of these federal resources are. There are some promising examples available from other regions, like our neighbors there to the south in California. Their Resilient California tool includes guidance, case studies, and tools. It's pretty fantastic and comprehensive, and probably like it is next level to what we have here in the Northwest, and getting closer to something like a climate.gov for at a regional scale. So that's just one example of something we could think about in trying to really step up at a regional scale while support for climate adaptation and the tools and resources needed for that are shrinking at the federal level. Um, and then just to wrap up, and we do have time for questions, and it looks like some of you have been leaving them in the Q&A or in the chat as we've been going, so that's great. Thank you. Just to wrap up, the federal situation is likely to remain fluid and is going to require some due diligence and adaptation by its users, us, moving forward. And um, so again, that due diligence, it's worth taking a quick check to see if anyone's been reporting on tools or resources that you're using from the federal government, just to make sure nothing fishy has been going on with them. And it pains me to say that because our federal colleagues have done such extraordinary work over the years to develop these tools. And it's hard to think that they could be corrupted, but it is worth taking a look and just making sure and just being flexible and ready to adapt and exploring the range of backups of federal resources that are out there, getting familiar with some of these backups. The trade-off in using some of these backups is that they're static, they're not being updated with the newest information. But they're on the plus side, we know that you can trust the accuracy and the rigor of the things that have been archived from previous administrations. And then again, we have many, many non-federal resources that are available at the regional scale or national non-federal resources that are applicable to the regional scale. So there are many there, and also room for us to fill gaps there. And then just a reminder that there is a deep pool of climate adaptation expertise and action in the Northwest. We're not where we were 10 years ago. We're in a strong place. If something like this was to happen at the federal scale, we're in a better place than we would have been several years ago to deal with this. And I know a lot of that great expertise is here on the call. So just thank you all so much for your good work and for navigating this sort of challenging, evolving landscape with us. We're really delighted to have you all as colleagues as we move through this time together. So thanks so much. And I'm going to stop sharing. And then again, we have looks like 12 minutes for questions.
Yes, we have a few questions. I'm happy to read them out to you. And I think this first one directly relates to what you just said in your last slide, Mead. Do you anticipate these resources being affected in the event of a prolonged government shutdown?
I don't know, actually. I don't know that any of them would be any of the ones that are like web-based. I haven't heard of any of them being disrupted because of the shutdown. Guillaume, I don't know if you or if anyone on the call has heard of that. I mean,
Um,
plenty of climate-related federal activities are being disrupted on the ground, but I don't know of web resources being affected.
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't think any of the resources that I highlighted um, rely on federal funding to be maintained, which in some cases means there is not other funding to maintain them either. So there is that. But I think there could be. I don't think that there's a direct effect here. Some of the clearinghouses, for instance, may link to federal resources that are not currently up, in addition to other resources that are non-federal. So that might be a consequence, but to my knowledge, they're not at risk in the same way that federal resources are right now.
Thank you both. And Guillaume, I see you're in the middle of typing an answer to this, but I think a lot of people might want to hear your answer out loud to Deb's question. Are there clearinghouse examples that you shared only on adaptation? Are there any mitigation examples at this scale?
Yeah, so this is probably a good, first of all, they are focused on adaptation, not mitigation, those two clearinghouse examples that I provided. There was, for instance, in the Department of Commerce Climate Policy Explorer, that includes both mitigation and adaptation actions, specifically focused on comprehensive planning. But this is also probably a good occasion to just note that adaptation is our expertise and what we focus on, although it can't be entirely separated from mitigation. So we are probably, we're not the experts in terms of what's out there on mitigation. And I would not be surprised to learn that there are good clearinghouses on mitigation. In fact, I've heard of a few, but that wasn't the focus here because it's not our focus in our work, even though it is absolutely important.
Great, thank you. Stephen has a question about, can you speak to any new or recent sources of small grants for adaptation at small city level population in Washington? And he means specifically for like nonprofits, not for city governments. An example would be the Edmonds Climate Advisory Board.
Mhm.
I don't. We are at the Climate Impacts Group offering a small grants program right now for Washington coastal tribes. So that is one opportunity that I'm aware of that is underway right now. If anyone else on the call knows of any, please add them to the chat.
I will note it's a federal resource and it is focused specifically on water use and water planning, although that can include quantity and quality. But the Bureau of Rec has water smart grants, some of which are specifically intended for communities, and I think could include community orgs, maybe in partnership with local jurisdictions. And those include planning grants, right? They seem like they may align with Steve's question.
Great. We have just a comment from Bob recognizing that while most people on this call are hard scientists, the resources for the psychosocial angle would also be valuable. Emotional resilience, what that might look like, community organizing, etc. Thank you, Bob. Um,
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I just wanted to emphasize that that is absolutely an important point. And both in terms of the social sciences, which is you know, not considered a quote unquote hard science, but is absolutely in many ways the more important one for the work we're doing. And in terms of the sort of climate grief aspects of the comment that Bob's making. And there is, on the social science side, has been quite a bit more recognition of its value, and in fact, even some discussion about how to prioritize that work. So, for instance, there's the social science for the Salish Sea report that looks not at climate impacts, but at ecological restoration in Puget Sound, but what kind of additional science is needed in that respect. Um, and that's just to mention on the social science side, the other side as well, is there's some good work and there are good resources.
Great. Oh man, and we have actually folks sharing resources, like Deb has been a rock star chatter and sharing resources in the chat. And then Peggy shared a resource in the Q&A for a previous question that Guillaume answered regarding an opportunity for folks who worked in the government, such as naval. So Jim said I did an MS in physical oceanography research through the UW in the 60s, sponsored by the Office of Naval Research. He was wondering if that kind of opportunity is still available. And so then Peggy shared a link in here. So I just appreciate everyone's helpfulness in this chat, in this community here. What do I see any other questions? We have someone else asking about mitigation again. Do you have suggestions of organizations who are focused on mitigation training and resources besides Washington State agency resources?
I think Guillaume already mentioned this, but we are way less well versed in the mitigation resources, to be honest. So if others on here are aware of any, please again share them. And thanks for asking these questions. Again, we do plan to send a list of links out and of all the resources we talked about after the call, and we can do a quick check for some of those mitigation resources too.
Yes, and we'll include resources shared in the chat. Katie, thanks. Um, those are the official questions. Any other questions in these last few minutes?
Hmm.
Just see lots of thank yous, which is great.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank
Yeah,
you, everyone.
and thank you all for again for your own amazing work. I know there's a lot of folks on here who work across state, local, tribal government, and universities, NGOs all across the board doing incredible climate work under what is right now pretty difficult circumstances. So thank you all. Hang in there. Glad to have you out in the world doing this along with us.
Right. Thanks, everyone. We'll send out materials in the next few days.